Hello and welcome to my Irish soda bread recipe video. Now I got this recipe off of a different YouTube video when I was searching for traditional Irish soda bread recipes. I happened across an actual ingredient list in the comments which I slightly modified. So I'll be leaving my recipe in the description, but first we're going to start off by measuring 750 grams of flour. As you see here, I'm using a scale to be precise. It's better to go with those percent by mass measurements versus percent by volume. Next up, we're going to be measuring out some buttermilk. It's possible to make this yourself, however, I found it a bit easier to just go out and buy some at the store. So you're going to want to take your buttermilk, tare your scale to the weight of the measuring cup, and pour out 600 grams of buttermilk. I had some left over from last time I made some, so I was able to use up that bottle. However, I had to break out a second bottle to top it off. Next up, we're going to be measuring out our baking soda and our salt. The baking soda is very important to remember, considering it's the thing that actually makes the dough rise. So first we're going to be taking care of the salt. It's 11 grams of salt and 11 grams of baking soda, although it's always suggested you add a pinch extra just to be sure. Now it's time for the most iconic part of Irish soda bread, the raisins. So we're going to be adding 160 grams of raisins to the mix, as you can see there on my recipe list. The reason we add it during this stage is to mix in with the flour. The flour helps keep the raisins from sticking to each other so we can get better dispersion throughout the bread. As with a few other clips, you're going to see the sped up process here. Here I'm mixing the dry ingredients by hand. If you want to take the most traditional approach, you're going to have to get comfortable with mixing everything by hand. So here I'm mixing in the salt, the baking soda, and the flour, and once I've got that all mixed together, I'm adding the raisins. You can see at this point how the flour helps me separate the raisins so that they can get mixed in a bit better. At this point I bring the buttermilk over and begin to make a well in the flour. By pushing the flour over onto the sides of the bowl, I create a pocket area to be able to pour in the buttermilk, and that's where the traditional approach takes hold. You pour the buttermilk in, like so, and begin to rake in the flour with your fingers. You slowly add more buttermilk as you go, and just try not to make it too sticky for yourself, because it will get really sticky. So try to keep exposing it to dry flour. Now's a good time to mention you should make sure to wash your hands before, after, and during this process. With the craziness going around, you should be washing your hands already. However, this gets pretty messy, and there's going to be certain parts where you're going to need clean hands, when you need to sprinkle flour on top, when you need to knead the dough properly. So make sure to keep your hands clean for when you're mixing by hand, and throughout just try to keep it clean but keep as much dough as you can. Now that our dough is all mixed together, we're going to want to preheat the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. We're also going to want to throw a pan in there. You're going to be using the pan to bake the bread, so make sure that you get it in there for a solid 40 minutes. Make sure that it's good and heated through. Then we're going to want to take a cutting board or some smooth surface. We're going to want to coat it in flour for the kneading process. Once again, we're going to speed up the video here, but to get the idea, you're basically just going to want to coat the entire surface in flour to avoid the dough sticking to it. Now for this part of the process, what we're going to want to do is take flour and sort of coat the top of it. We're going to want to push in the sides, and as you see, I pick it up and fold it in on itself. It's a sort of stretch and fold method where I try to create some more air pockets in it. Then once I'm finished with that, I'm going to start to push the sides in on themselves to try and create what's called a boule. I'm going to try to create a tighter boule so that it has a better spring in the oven. And for this part, you're going to need to make sure to use lots of flour. Now here's what it should look like by the end of the process. However, I'm going to give a more close-up view so that you can see better how I'm doing it. Basically, I half cup my hand, and your hand should either be wet or covered in flour for this so the dough doesn't stick to them too much. What you want to do is take your hand and push in the sides of it. Currently, I'm grabbing some more flour to help not stick to the dough too much. So now, taking a look at our oven, we can see that it's almost time to bake the bread. What we're going to want to do is take water, and you may have a kettle. I'm using one myself, but either way, you want to bring water to a boil. You're going to put the boiling water in a pot alongside the pan that you're cooking the bread in, and in the end it'll give it a much crispier crust. Now it's time for one of the most important parts of baking Irish soda bread, turf. Turf is similar to coal and is often used, or was often used, in ovens in Ireland. And so putting a little bit in the oven will really give that crust the scent of traditional Irish soda bread. Now we flour the pan to get it ready for the bread. We don't want the bread to wind up sticking to the pan once it's been baked. And very important for this upcoming part, when you put the bread in the oven, remember that the pan has been preheated. I burnt myself pretty bad today, forgetting about putting on an oven mitt for that part, so make sure, be safe. Now we've got the bread in the oven, we're going to want to throw in that pot of water to make sure that we get that crust nice and crispy. We already have the turf going, it's beginning to smoke a bit. Now we're going to want to set the timer to 35 minutes and leave it like that. Normally you'd want to cut a bit down the middle of the thing, however there was already a bit of a tear when we tightened the bowl of the dough. So now you can see it's risen in the pan quite nicely. There's a solid crust to it. So now what you're going to want to do is let it cool before you cut it. It's a very important part to let it cool. There you see I have a cloth over it to help the crust just a bit extra, however that part's unnecessary. By now the pan should be cool enough to handle. Make sure though, don't just go and burn yourself like I did. And just like that, we have our traditional Irish soda bread. It's pretty simple, pretty easy, and pretty fast. So thank you all for watching. I'll leave a link to the YouTube video I got inspired from in the description, as well as the recipe. And thank you to my friend Jess for helping get me inspired again in baking. Signing off.